Hi and welcome to an episode of AP World History and the Joy of Writing. I can't believe this is our first episode, and I want to thank you all for joining me on this wonderful journey through AP Writing. Today we're going to do a world history essay, and this is meant not so that you will copy, but that to give you a technique that you will let loose on the world. To start, here are all the materials that you'll need to write along with us. First, you'll need a pen and some paper. Now I think we're ready to begin, and we need to look at the question prompt. This one takes us all the way back to 2017 as a comparison and contrast essay. That's great. I love comparisons and contrasts. They really go together like a warm sunset. Isn't that pretty? So let's see the prompt. It says, develop an argument that analyzes the cause of any two Atlantic revolutions in the time period from 1750 to 1850. Let's look at all the ways we can answer the question. I'm sure you all thought of some ideas already. You, my bright pupils, you always impress me. I know you do that. Thank you for that. It's a joy teaching you. So, the Atlantic revolutions, there were 4 of them that we studied. You remember them, right? Of course you did. The American, French, Haitian, and Latin American revolutions were the 4, and we get to choose any 2. By choosing, this means we have to compare, not just focus on causation. So today, let's look at the American and French revolutions, since I'm sure we can find some happy little arguments to throw in there and build a thesis. One complete essay ready to go. You may write down anything you choose to help you see all the joyous connections we're going to make today. Okay, let's look at the American Revolution and list some happy pieces of evidence that are just dying to join our essay. So, when we think of the causes of the American Revolution, what do we think of? I knew you had answers. You really know how to add to the joy of writing. Thank you. Now, what evidence is just itching to be part of our essay? You're right. I definitely would include taxation, but there are other information to add to go along with it. Yes, the Americans were taxed without their consent. They felt that they were not represented by the British Parliament. So, this caused a view to be separate from the British. And even that separation caused an identity to form that was purely American and not just British. Also, Enlightenment ideals had Americans thinking that they deserved to be ruled by people they chose, and by a government of their choosing, not some foreign and distant land telling them what to do. They used these theories from John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau to justify their need for a separation from England. Do you remember those thinkers? What time period that was? Good. It's the Enlightenment. Well done. So to recap all the happy evidence, shared separate identity from Britain and Enlightenment ideals are 2 key points about the American Revolution. However, I don't think that identity part is enough to really explain our point. What kind of identity? Well, let's look at our spiced tea categories. I can think of 2 of them, can't you? Good. Excellent. I knew you'd get that down. You guys are great. So, we're all in this together, remember, and this is a good job. Alright, so, the American identity had a separate economic identity in how they made their money. The cash crops in the South, shipbuilding in the North, trade in the middle colonies, this was all certainly different. Also, the Americans had a separate political identity. They certainly did that in each of their colonies, where they each had their own representative governments, like the Virginia House of Burgesses. These governments levied their own taxes too. Okay, now let's see where we get with the French. If we remember from earlier, French society had 3 estates that made up the Estates General, their governing body. Those estates were made from the first estate that was nobles, the second estate was clergy, and the third estate was everyone else. The third estate was regularly left out of decision making, where the first 2 worked together against the third. And that basically meant they were left out in many of the laws that were passed. So this third estate was also influenced by the Enlightenment thinking, and particularly the ruling by consent of the governed. So let's put our happy little pieces of evidence together and make some arguments, shall we? Awesome. First, we see that the Enlightenment managed to influence both the thinking of the Americans and the French, and so that both of them led towards revolution due to these Enlightenment ideals. Good. They both saw that a monarchy was not someone they elected. They both saw a monarchy that was not a government of their choosing, but given to them and handed down through time. But they didn't elect that person, and they saw these abuses of the monarch as a reason for change, a cause to revolution. However, they did not come from the same point. As the Americans viewed themselves as distinct from the British, the Third Estate kept their identity of being French, just as French as the king and the nobility. So that's our difference we're going to look at. You saw that too? Awesome. Let's keep going. So, argument one is that they were both caused by Enlightenment views on government and who should make the laws. Argument two is that while one created a separate identity from its ruler, the other came from within the imperial power and saw their identity with the ruler, just separate somewhere else. So, adding a dash of time period, sprinkling in some arguments, and then just add a strong value of the arguments to create a thesis. Are you ready? Good. So, let me write it up here for you. One that looks like this, all right? In the time period 1750 to 1850, so we got our time period, the ideas of the Enlightenment created a desire and justification for revolution for both the French and the Americans. However, the Americans saw themselves as having a separate national identity with their ruler, and the French saw their king as the outsider. The two revolutions are significantly more similar in their ideals and principles, more clearly defined their revolutions than the identities of the rebelling peoples. Wow, that's a big thesis. Does it have everything we need? Yeah, well, let's take another look, shall we? While it might seem that it has too much detail, and oftentimes you've been upset with me by saying it's too broad or too specific, in this case, it's generalizing but specific so it fits both groups. So it doesn't say King Louis or King George, it says their ruler. It's not specific to each, but we know exactly what they're talking about in each case. So if that's our thesis, how do we introduce the topic in a context? Well, okay, let me get rid of it. What would you say our topic is all about? I think it would be something like revolutions, you? Right? Cool. Well done. So, why do we study revolutions? Right, because they can happen and they can change a government, a country, and all of history. They're a big deal in world history. We've seen a lot of reforms and changes and movements. So that's our general topic, is reform movements and revolutions. So that's the global thing. Why do we study history? So now why these two? So our context needs to relate revolutions, political changes, and how those cute events turn into magical new states. Okay? So now we need to talk about revolutions in general as a good foundation, and then add the colorful bits that specify why we study these two. So a good context would be, revolutions cause massive upheaval wherever they form. They topple the existing order and replace it with a new government or ruler, which changes a state's direction and development. In the 18th century, both the Americans and French rebelled against their government and each founded its own state. However, one of their republics did not last more than 2 decades, while the other was the most powerful nation 150 years later. Okay? So there we took the idea of revolutions, we talked about why they're a big deal, we then implied that this is going to happen with the French and the American revolutions, and then set down to why are we studying particularly the French and the Americans. There we go. I really like what we just did there. You see how the connection, the topic, is in general to the two revolutions? Yeah, that's a nice way of really squeezing in you know why we study history. That's what context is all about. Is why are we doing this? Why are we doing this study? Why does it matter? Because right now, as we're discussing like the coronavirus. We could be looking at a pandemic essay, and last year, no one would have thought there would be any reason to study a pandemic of the 1919 flu epidemic. No one would say, well, why are we studying this and there's no relevance? Because we have to show that there's relevance. Now that current events are popping up again, there's things we can learn from those. There's things we learned from Milan from the 1350s. What did they do during the Black Death? Milan, sadly enough, if someone had the plague, they boarded up the entire house, everybody inside. And while that was tragic to the family, it saved lives for most. Milan had the least amount of casualties of anybody from this plague. So we learn things from history. This is why we study history. It makes so that there's something important, significant, enough to get a point across in our essay. So our essay nicely begins with these two parts. Let's see if we can keep going and really bring in that beauty we tried to create. I know we can do it. Now, we take our first main argument about the Enlightenment and then make that our topic sentence next. Oh, wait, sorry. I forgot to erase the board. All right. Ready to start again? Good. All right. So now we need to make it sound like it's an argument. If we just wrote that the ideals of the Enlightenment was the influence to these revolutions, that's factual. No one's going to disagree with the ideals of the Enlightenment causing this. So we got to sprinkle in a few words that connects it to the thesis. And you have a topic sentence. So let me just write one in there for you. So both the American and French revolutions reflected Enlightenment ideals, which would lead to their revolts. Okay? You're right. The Enlightenment ideals there. But what I create as an argument is I'm connecting and saying the French and the American revolutions and the causes of them were similar in those Enlightenment ideals. I am making them connected. So instead of saying Enlightenment ideals caused the French and the American revolutions, I'm saying both of their causes were similar because of these Enlightenment ideals. Yes, the wording changes and it gets to a little bit different and semantics become an issue. But that's what arguing is. You turn something that would be factual into an argument. Good. Now we have the topic sentence. Let's substantiate that with further sentences. So I'll write them up here and then show you how it all works as I go. All right? There we go. All done. So, I wanted to start with a base layer talking about the Enlightenment, and that sets the stage. If you don't begin with some foundation, the latter parts might wander off. So it helps to focus and blend them into a nice, happy paragraph. Okay? I'm going to keep going. So here I blended the ideas. I introduced the Enlightenment, added that to my argument on the American colonies, and created some nice variation with that blend. See how it weaves together? Yeah. Now let's dab in some French, okay? In France, the new taxes to be levied were agreed upon. Oh, right, good. All right. Oh, it's getting to be a big essay, isn't it? Already, it's one huge paragraph. I know. Now, I included the French example, but I blended it with the Enlightenment. But I had to combine them? No, not yet. So I knew you'd pick up on that. You're so smart, because you realize that's two pieces of evidence, but did I really put them together? Let's add those last sentences now, okay? So, wow, that's truly a nice paragraph. I blended the elements together to create a flowing and radiant argument. I think that's finally done. Remember, you can do that too. It's remembering the steps. Oh, one sec. It's time for a commercial. Here's a little side thing just to keep seeing if you're paying attention. It's a little goofy.
Mégane l'équipe. Priorité au sport.
Now we need to move to a different part of our paper and fill it with its difference. Ready? Okay. So once again, a topic sentence. As you read that topic sentence, can you argue against it? While some of you may trip up with that topic sentence, let's look at how it is a compound sentence and how it works, okay? Because really, learning how to blend them, that's the key to the joy of writing, is putting it all together. All right? Yeah. So by introducing or mentoring the causes in the first clause, I am mixing the clauses of revolution on the palette of my page with developing a national identity. So by those having a connection, this mixes an argument. All right? So, once again, to go over these things, that by showing we're talking still about the causes of the American Revolution, and that the French differed in their views of the relationship and identity with their governing power. We are explaining that they are different, but we're still talking about how that influences the causes of their revolution. Right, good, okay. So let me write a little bit more. Yep, see? Look how quick that was. That was easy. So the last bit right there, I blended the two ideas into a paragraph on national identity formation. A lot of you used to, wait a minute, isn't that two separate ideas? The overall idea is national identity. So now I'm going to write in the French side again. Looks good, doesn't it? Since I've already established how identity led to the causes for revolution, I'm now comparing the two in the last sentence about the French. So I then have them swim gently into a sentence that compares them both. While that seems like extra, you need to have a sentence like this to fully complete that paragraph. Evidence, evidence, evidence 2 is explanation and fitting to your argument, right? So it's like when you add these sentences to make this complete paragraph, you're adding a painting of mountains without a sky. You need the sky in there. So you don't want to leave the mountains alone, do you? They just sit there by themselves, and that's not really that good. No, you want to make it a complete paragraph. Mountains with a sky. All right? So now we're going to top it all off with one last final sentence. Yep. Okay. Now that we have these lovely paragraphs, we need to finish it by rewriting the thesis. We've got our paragraphs. Oh, I gotta erase that board again. Good. All right. Now that we have these lovely paragraphs, we need to finish by rewriting the thesis. In this one, just remember what you wrote about it and put it into a new thesis. Keep the same ideas, try to write it as separately in your time. This could really save you and tie in everything together, as well as now that everything's in your memory what you wrote about, you can easily more connect it, all right? So here I'm going to do that again. Cool. All right. There you go. Another happy little paragraph. Just 2 sentences, like they found each other after a long separation. Right, I know. That sounds good too. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you really understood how to write an essay in this style. I had fun writing it. I know you probably enjoyed it too. So thank you all for tuning in. And this is The Joy of Writing. I'm your host, Mr. Johnson. Thanks. And I hope you have a wonderful day.